I want to go back to a point that you made, and that's what I was going to say earlier. You said it perfectly. It's something that confuses me. If Palestinians are listed as, from what I remember, as the only currently occupied people on the planet.
Yep.
And the law reads, the UN laws, and I don't know if they're entangled with international laws, read that an occupied people have a right to defend themselves by any means necessary, even
use of arms,
use of weapons. But yet when it comes to the Palestinians and them being the only ones that are occupied on the planet currently, we just ignore that. It seems
that's correct. Yes, it's a double standard, and so one has to ask why. Because what we're talking about, believe me, everybody in the U.S. government understands this quite well.
Oh,
they understand
they know.
the legal aspects of it, the humanitarian aspects of it, and so for me the question is, if the United States understands this, as I am sure they do, why do they encourage it and permit it?
Why is that?
Well, what do you think? I mean, I'll tell you. I'll let you know what I think in a minute. But
well, I think we talked about this before. And my response before, I'll say the same thing. It's because we're allies with them.
So why are we allies? Because, I mean, the term ally.
Well, it's because of the region, right? Control of the region, strategic influence in the area.
Yes, okay. There's another way of talking about that alliance.
A lot of other people would say they're saturated in our government, in our society.
Well, there's some truth to that.
But Israel goes.
We can come back to that, APEC and Jewish influence and all that. But yes, they're allies, but that's even a more, what I would call, a sanitized way of talking about the U.S.-Israeli relationship. They're our proxies in the region. They're not the only ones, but they're proxies. That means, what is a proxy? It's someone who does stuff, and stuff in quotation marks, meaning the dirty work, for somebody else. And so, yes, they're allies, but we're allies with them because they fulfill certain aspects of U.S. Middle East policy. And that's what the relationship is about. So we let our proxies get away with things that we would not let others get away with. Now, another proxy that we hardly ever criticized them until recently was Saudi Arabia. I mean, you look at Saudi Arabia, my gosh, its history of human rights, and here it is, our, faithful ally. Well, what's that about? Well, that's not hard, is it? What the U.S.-Saudi alliance is about? It's about oil. It's simple as that. The proxy relationship that Israel fulfills is different. It hardly has any oil, but it has. That's its main role. So all this talk about
you don't think it's more of a headache than anything?
Well, it's become a headache. It has to do with, historically, the United States needed in the Middle East more than one proxy, and it had two until 1979. It had Iran under the Shah and Israel. Iran is a much more effective proxy, or it was, than Israel. Why? Because it's an Islamic country. True, it might be Shiite, but still, it was an Islamic country. And it also had a population, I don't even know what it is now, I think it's something like 80 or 90 million, but it was of 50 million, whereas Israel was much smaller. But, Israel, all right, here's how that worked. The United States, and the one who wrote the most, what I feel is the clearest about this proxy relationship, which people don't really get for the most part, is Noam Chomsky, and it's an old book. It's called The Fateful Triangle. It's a still readable masterpiece as far as I'm concerned, even though it's 30, 40 years old now. But it explains the relationship, okay? So the United States has always preferred weak and corrupt Arab oil-producing allies. Why? because they can, they are corrupted. They're going to play an American game with us, all right? And that American game is control of what was, or still is, the energy, oil and natural gas in the Middle East. Israel's role is different. All right, well, wait a minute. I got to add one more thing to this. So the weaker the Arab regime is, the more it needs support from Washington to stay in power, because its people are, critical too. And that serves U.S. interests. If you look at who the U.S. allies were in the Arab world, they're a pretty motley lot, okay? Israel also wants to keep Arab countries weak for different reasons. Why? Because a weak Arab world militarily and politically means a stronger Israel. So Israel's survival interests merge with U.S., if you like, corporate and material interests. But it always has been that the United States tried to work through proxies rather than direct military intervention in the Middle East, particularly after Vietnam. All right? So Israel has played that role. And it's played that role, from a U.S. Corporate interest point of view pretty well until recently. And now there are a number of changes that have taken place in the world where Israel, because it does not have that oil and natural gas, or not much of it, is becoming more of a liability than an asset. And I know that there are echoes of discussions that are taking place right now within the U.S. government, State Department, Central Intelligence Agency, and the like. And that's the question. Is Israel a useful ally today? And while I don't expect to see any changes in fundamental changes for some time, that's an issue that's not going to go away, because Israel has shifted just in the last decades from being a strategic ally to something of a hot potato that we don't. Classic example right now, what we're seeing. So this goes on, and it will have a long-term impact. No question about it. And I can't put time frames on things because you just don't know. But I would say this, that that in the past few years, the question of the usefulness of Israel as a strategic asset has been behind-the-scenes discussion at very high levels in this country. And the tide is turning, so to speak.
Well, yeah, so I'm not really the expert on geopolitical or economic, relationships across the globe, especially in that region. But I do know what I see. And I see a people that reminds me of the people that I come from, and the Scottish and the Irish. And I see a lot of Scottish and Irish that support the Palestinians because I think they see themselves in their struggle in the Palestinians. And Palestinians, in my opinion, nothing against any other Arabs in the Middle East or in any other Arab countries, but the Palestinians have this kind of going back to what you said, how that area was a main trade route going through, and all the mixing that happened over the centuries. And with that mixing, you got different genetics that went in there, you had different knowledge that went in there, and you had to have a people that they learned. That's how they learned over thousands of years. They learned from all these other cultures, and they got, call it intelligence, call it grit, call it, resilience. I see, just like you see a lot of immigrants come to America and they start businesses and restaurants and things like that. All the Palestinians I've ever met, they work a lot more than what I've seen in some other groups. They just
very hardworking and very entrepreneurial.
Very.
Yes. That's my experience with them too.
So that's been one thing that I've noticed with the Palestinians. You're trying to step on them and you're trying to squash them. And that has happened to a lot of other groups of people throughout the globe. But I think it's a little difficult to do to the Palestinians.
there's who's that famous the guy, the gourmet cook who committed suicide.
Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah, thank you. Perfect. And so he has a statement. It's something like, well, the best food in the world comes from, and then I don't remember what the answer is. And he says, but when it comes to courage and resilience, the Palestinians are the best. I agree with that. The most resilient, the resilience of the Palestinian people. When you think of what they're going through today, what they've been through the last 75 years, and what the spirit of these folks, not to give up, and also their humanity, as I have experienced it. They are the least racist, anti-Semitic people in the Arab world.
Well, they
the
are.
ones who are being oppressed the most.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've always it's been very easy for me to have just decent human connections with them, and I actually treasure those connections.
Yeah, I've known racism from almost
Yes.
every group of people. Just me being a white guy, and from different groups that are not white, and I've never felt that from Palestinians.
No.
Never.
Well, my experience is similar. There's one other group who, in terms of just toughness of spirit, is up there with them, and that's the Yemenis, the ones that I've met. So yeah, and who do you see now? Kind of challenging
the world,
the United States and Israel,
the entire world. Yeah. Well, not necessarily the world. They're not going at it. Yeah.
No.
They've made
right.
it very specific where their focus is at.
Yes. But I agree with this. It's incredible the resilience of the Palestinian people, and I'm glad that they have it. Let me put it that way.
So there's a lot of stories coming out too, not just since October 7th, but that historically I've seen videos. I've seen videos of settlers stoning Palestinians, kids, children, teenagers to death, while the IDF just stands there and watches.
Yep.
I've heard stories of a kid was outside of his family. His Palestinian kid was outside of the acreage where they had trees. Sorry, I'm having
olive trees and olive grove.
Fruit.
Okay.
Sorry, an orchard. That's the word I was looking
Orchard.
for.
Yeah.
Outside the orchard, on the street, selling the fruit from the orchard. The kids, they sit out there and do that sometimes. And I've heard stories of a settler coming by and saying, "Hey, I want to buy your fruit." Kid says, "Okay, how much you want to buy?" He says, "All of it." Kid says, "Okay, great. I can go home. I just sold all the fruit I got right here." Sells them the fruit. The settlers go to the court and say, "I bought the orchard." And they have these papers that they make that they get stamped or something, because they have people who work in all of the offices and the agencies. And the family's like, "What are you talking about? You own our orchard." "Yeah, you had someone out there selling the fruit, and I bought all of the fruit. I wanted all of the fruit."
Yeah.
And just things like, and then the Palestinians, they go to court, they fight it. But of course that lasts years. By then the settlers are moving in, probably killed, some of the sons of the family probably, did something, probably, moved in their house, beat up people, killed people. By the time it even gets in front of the court, which isn't legitimate anyways, for the Palestinians at least, then the family's displaced, dead, in jail, in prison, whatever happened to them. Just recently in Gaza, you hear about that hospital that the IDF keeps raiding. I forget the name of it.
I know the one in the south in Rafah. Yeah, the one that's left.
I think
they just executed the head surgeon because he wouldn't stop doing surgeries.
Yeah, they keep attacking doctors and press and that. There was a story that came out about IDF soldiers that went in there, took a woman into the room, made her family come in the room.
Yes,
her sons, her husband, her family and told them if you and we're gonna rape her, and if you look away, we're gonna put a bullet in her head. You're gonna watch. And then after they raped her, they still put a bullet in her head, right in front of her family. Now these are stories that come out, but they're no different than the stories that came out from 40 babies being beheaded. But we have no evidence of that yet. No evidence came out. There's been no pictures that came out. So what's your go on? Continue. No, go ahead. I think you get the point. My point is there's just all of these things that keep happening against the Palestinians.
That's correct.
And those are fine. Those are okay. Those are just normal things. Like you said earlier, we're just fighting Hamas.
Right.
But when something happens to the Israelis, even though before October 7th, these type of behaviors that I'm mentioning were still happening to the Palestinians daily.
So, one of the things that since October 7th, it's really ripped the mask off of what Israel and Zionism is about. And so what you're describing has been going on for decades. The theft of land, the degrading treatment, even if it wasn't at the extreme, we're seeing it now in Gaza, of the Palestinian people, mass arrests. Again, it's not for nothing that major human rights organizations, long before October 7th, have defined what Israel is doing to Palestinians as apartheid-like treatment. And that's what it is. It's kind of a two-tiered system in every way. And what you're describing to me has been the daily experience of Palestinians living under occupation, with all the horrors that entails. Now it's gone, of course, to again, the term is not used lightly, genocidal level in Gaza. So one of the things that comes to my mind is, all right, Israel is a country that, I'm a critic of it and have long been, but they're not stupid. They're quite sophisticated politically in defending their own interests. So what does, the story but the event that you just described, which has been all over the media, this rape of a young woman in this hospital by Israelis. And there's so many other stories like that. The execution, the stripping down of men, the execution of civilians, calling them Hamas, the forced starvation, the whole horrific picture, which is what Israel is doing in Gaza right now. And the question is, well, what's the deal? They know what they're doing. So why? And not only are they doing it, but they're celebrating it. They're celebrating, Israeli soldiers are, they're taking their selfies, doing these horrible things, and they're being posted, and there's no attempt on the part of the Israeli military or Israeli society to censor any of that. So we have to ask, what's the deal? And here's my take on that. What is it that Israel lost on October 7th? It lost the myth of the strong Israeli military. Basically, the myth that Israel's military, the Palestinians and the rest of the Arab world feared it. And in one fell swoop, oh man, this military can be defeated in a battle. They can be surprised. They can be embarrassed. What's there to be afraid of? This is the biggest blow to Israeli prestige right now. So what they're trying to do in the horrors that they are perpetrating against the people of Gaza, which everybody in the world except the blindest of Zionists can just recognizes, and as you have just described, Why are they doing this? They want to reinstitute the notion of fear in the heart of the Palestinian and other Arab people. They've lost that. And so they have lost one of their main cards of deterrence. And the second part of that is, what Israel has basically said is, we're the defenders of the Jews. Come, wherever you are, you're Jewish, come join us, come home, to Israel. And we will protect you because here you're safe. Well, that also was shattered on October 7th. And not just on October 7th, because, there's that whole event. We can come back to that in a minute. But also in the north of Israel. So in the north of Israel now, if I remember right, it's about a third of the Israeli military is facing the Hezbollah militias in southern Lebanon. And they're not doing real well there either. The Israelis are not doing there well. So both in the area, the Israeli areas just outside of Gaza, and then in the north by the Lebanese border, the numbers keep changing, but the number that I saw was several 100,000 Israelis have been forced to leave because it's no longer secure. Bombs are coming down both places. All right, what does that mean? Israel cannot protect its Jewish population the way it said. So all of this is a tremendous threat to Israel. And the way it responds to it is through this super vicious cruelty that it is conducting in Gaza. And what it's trying to do, at least my take on what it's trying to do, is to reestablish that fear that existed among the Arab peoples that literally dissipated on October 7th. That was the biggest blow on October 7th, that the Arab world saw Israel's not invincible. It just reminds me, when I was a kid, growing up in New York City, there were a lot of ethnic turf wars. The Italian neighborhood and the Irish neighborhood and the Jewish neighborhood. And classically, me and my friends, we weren't the particularly good fighters. But, and by the way, nobody took out a knife or a gun. You got hit, maybe you got hit with a chain once in a while, and it hurt. But the idea that you were going to be killed by walking through another, no, or seriously injured. But still, I was beat up a couple times. And I was complaining to one of my friends about it, and he says, "Well, you got to. This is how you have to deal with it. Pick the leader of the group. Look him straight in the eye, and usually we're talking about 3 or 4 guys. Punch him in the nose as hard as you can, and run like hell." It worked the first time. All right, but what's the thing about picking the leader and punching him in the nose? He's a bully, that's all. So what have you done? You've just punched the bully in the nose, and all of his friends are a bunch of little chicken shits along with him, and that's it. Okay, so why am I telling you this story? Because this is what the Palestinians did to Israel. They punched them in the nose, in a sense. And that was unforgivable. That was unforgivable. So I know there's a lot of other things we could talk about for October 7th, but October 7th changed the image of Israel to its own Jewish people. And the image was, the Israeli government cannot protect us, like they said. They cannot protect us from Hamas, and they cannot protect us from Hezbollah in the north. And that is still a burning issue in Israel today. And in fact, it's one of the things that's pushing the Netanyahu government to possibly attack southern Lebanon, because it has to prove to Israeli settlers who lived in the north of Israel that they can live in safety. And what that basically means is they've got to go after Hezbollah. Going after Hezbollah is a little bit different from everything that I know of. Basically what Hamas is engaged in, call it what you like, it's guerrilla warfare against the Israelis. And guerrilla warfare takes time, it doesn't happen overnight.
They don't have a lot of resources.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hezbollah is a whole different kind of warfare. Now,
Yes.
I don't know. I'm hoping there's not going to be that war, but the internal pressure in Israel to prove to its own people that it can provide that security that it promised is pushing Netanyahu hard to do something in the north. And right now they can't figure out what to do.
So what do you think about the people that argue that Israel has created this insecurity for themselves?
Of course.
By all of the acts that they've done in the past decades.
Absolutely. Let me tell you another, again, a story that's kind of a metaphor.
They haven't tried to make peace with their neighbors.
Okay. Well, you could, now what would Jared Kushner say? Well, we did try to make peace. We're making peace with our neighbors with the Abrahamic Initiative. But if you think about what the Abrahamic Initiative is Israel trying to make peace with its Arab neighbors without settling the Palestinian conflict, bypass the Palestinian conflict. And so you can find the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Bahrainis, some nibbles is how I would put it for that. All right, here's the story. I'm teaching at the University of Denver. Now, over the years, there would be elderly folk, I guess, which I am now one of, who could audit the class for nothing. Okay, cool. And I had an awful lot of them. And they would come and take notes. Okay, that's fine. They didn't have to take a test. I didn't care. The classes were on global political economy. So basically, we're talking about the 1990s, post-collapse of the Soviet Union, what was going on in the world in the decade of the 90s, the decade just after the millennium. That's what I was looking at, kind of where's the world headed and what's going on. In those discussions, the question of Israel and Palestine, it's not like it never came up, but it didn't come up often. And if it did, I would, address it to the best of my ability. But mostly I'm talking about global economic and political trends, on a global scale that are now, if you like, being played out pretty obviously, more so than when I was teaching. I started to notice that in one particular class, which was global political economy, I kept getting a lot of elderly Jewish folk who were auditing the class. I said, well, welcome. And after one of these sessions, the course is over, and it was a woman about my age. So in those, must have been in the 60s. I was in the 60s at that point. She said, I have to talk to you. I said, sure. Now, by that time, when somebody said, I have to talk to you, usually it was about Israel and Palestine and, my views on it. Okay, let's talk. Well, I had so many of these discussions, and also a lot of my students were Jewish, and I would have discussions with them. And rarely, they were always respectful and friendly, regardless of, where they were coming from. So I understood that this woman, mostly what she was really upset about was I didn't talk about Israel and Palestine, and of course on global political economy. All right. So I decided I want to do something a little different this time. You're trying to think of, how can I reach her? I know she's a good person. I know it. I also know that I knew who sent her. I knew exactly what her role was. I didn't care. She could take as much notes as she wanted to. Anyhow, I decided I'm going to try a geographical approach. Meaning what? So I start off with her, and immediately she says, how can you say the things you say about Israel? So she's honest. That's what she wants to get into. I said, well, I didn't talk about Israel in the class. She says, yes, I know. I was really upset because she couldn't take any notes on me for it or whatever. I said, okay, listen. We can talk about it. Where is Israel? She looks at me and said, what do you mean? I said, geographically, where is it located? Now, what's the logic in my little sick head here? Israel is in the Middle East. Israel's future, if it has a future in the region, depends upon making peace with its neighbors. in order to make peace with its neighbors, it's got to make peace with the Palestinians. There's no way of Israel somehow bypassing this issue. But if it can make peace with the Palestinians, Israel's got a future in the Middle East, and a really interesting one. So that was my, that was the way I was, well, let's see if this one works. Okay, the geographic stuff. And she didn't understand me. I said, where is Israel geographically? And she looks at me, gives me this blank, kept looking at this blank look. And I finally have to say what I was hoping to draw out from her, it's in the Middle East. You know what she says when I say that? No, it's not. I said, wait a second, let me get this straight. So here we are in Colorado. There's New York City, where also she came from, like me, right? A New York City Jew in Colorado. At the end of Long Island, there's Montauk Point, and 10 miles out somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, past Montauk Point, is Tel Aviv. And she says, yes. And quite seriously, a mental map, not a mental map. For her already Israel is the 51st state in her mind. Now that was just so. And I looked at her and I said, honestly, I don't know what to tell you. I didn't know where to take it. But it was a mental map. It's a mental map. And it is, Israel is not in the Middle East. You speak to American Zionist Jews, that is, they might not say it quite as bluntly as she did, but that's their mental image. Israel is not a Middle Eastern country, as far as they're concerned.
It's a suburb of New York?
Yeah.
That was just a joke.
All right, but this is the problem.
Do they think about it as like a Mediterranean country?
No. Well, my sense is they think of it as a European country. And, and it's true. Most of Israel's economic its ties are with, the European Union type countries, places like that. But they don't see it as a Middle East country. They don't see it as part and parcel of the Middle East. They themselves see it as a foreign element in the Middle East. And for me, that's a tremendous problem. If you think of Palestinians as your neighbors, don't you want to make peace with your neighbors? Just, you don't have to like them or whatever, but just for obvious reasons? And the answer is no. All right, and that's part of the Zionist mentality. So there it was. This is an intelligent woman, honest to gosh. We talked about other things in those days. That was the W. Bush administration at the time was in power here. But when it came to this, she was blind. As far as I was concerned, she absolutely a blind spot that was so big that I didn't know what to say. I didn't know where to take it. And I still don't know where to take it with people like that.
So are Israelis, and this is just a question, I don't know.
Right.
Are Israelis scared to give Palestinians their own state, thinking that there'll be further conflict, or do they just want all the land?
Well, they want the land. But here's the other tragedy of it. In the 21st century, land expansion, territorial expansion is irrelevant. We're in a high-tech world, a globalized world. What the heck in the bottom, what does a couple of 100,000 more acres mean in terms of Israeli prosperity? It doesn't mean anything as far as I'm concerned. And so that's the tragedy of this whole thing. Or at least one of the big tragedies, is the whole way that Israel perceives of its future in terms of territorial expansion and what we can only consider nonsense about, God gave us this land, chosen people, and that's just, to me, it's simply a form of, quite frankly, of racism to say we're chosen and everybody else isn't. I've always rejected that. And when it's been asked me, I'd say, you're chosen. Yeah, chosen by whom to do what to whom. So
yeah, some pushback I got after our last podcast that you and I did was that we talked about is, are Jews a race versus a religion?
Oh, right.
And so, there was a whole argument, and I've seen a lot of comments about that. But I would agree that at some point, just like with any group of people, especially religion, when you started a religion, at some point when people were a religion, then of course they were a race at that point, because it was very narrowed down to a group of people. But then as it expands, and now you have a lot more people that are exposed to it and have become that religion, then it's not a race anymore.
One of the things we know very little about is the genetic mix of early Israelis. What we know about the region in general is that the gene pool shifted continually, because it's an area. I mean, if we had a map here, we could see, there's Turkey and Iran, and here's Egypt and, North Africa. And basically, what today is Lebanon and Syria, and I suppose Iraq and Israel, was a transit zone between empires. So whether it was the Egyptians going north through Israel, Palestine, or the Persians or the Hittites or whoever coming south, this was the unstable region of this entire area for millennium. Okay, what does that mean in terms of gene pool? A lot of mixing. And, looking today, there's some really interesting studies on where did these European Jews come from? All right. Now, I'm interested in the question partially, how did my ancestors wind up in Grodno in Belarus and Bialystok in Poland and Prieni in Lithuania? When did they get there? Where were they coming from? So the first thesis is they came with the Roman Empire. As the Roman Empire expanded, Jews were already kind of a commercial type trading people, and they wound up in the cities wherever. Okay, that made sense to me, and I did some research on that, particularly about the history of French Jews. Some of the stuff we're reading now is saying, no. Modern European Judaism has come from Central Asia, this group of people called the Khazars. Okay, I don't have a stake in this race, so to speak. We'll find out what the origins are. But the bottom line is, what has Judaism been for most of its history? It's been a religion that unites people really dispersed in many parts of the old world, from Western China to Morocco. It's really quite incredible when you look at the mix there, and here's this religion, and that ties them together in this interesting way. All right, there's nothing racial about that. You look at Jews from India. There are Indian Jews. I never knew there were Jews in India until when I went into the Peace Corps. We had a psychiatrist who was an Indian Jew. I said, "You're kidding me."
Oh yeah.
Russian Jews, Moroccan Jews, Ethiopian Jews.
Yeah.
Ethiopian Jews don't look like me. Okay, they're Jewish. So i.e. the notion that the Jews are a race, I've never taken. Whatever we are, we're not a race.
Are Muslims a race? I mean,
No, of course not.
If you think of Muslim, most people think of Arab. But the most Muslims on the planet, I think, are Indonesian.
That's right.
Or Malaysian.
Or Chinese.
There's a lot
200.
of Chinese.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Christians. So does that mean all the Christians are of Hebrew descent?
Right. You got it. Right.
Because Jesus was Hebrew?
And I'm with you on this. We're on the same page.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what the problem is. So, but we're gonna push this thing that, well, Jews are a race, and then we get into
they're Semitic people. The narrative, right? They're Semitic people. Yeah. If you say something against them, then you're anti-Semitic.
Yeah, but there are other Semitic peoples too, aren't there? like the Arabs.
like the Palestinians.
Yeah, like the Palestinians or the Ethiopians or the Sudanese, or there's so many of them that are Semitic.
Are the Palestinians anti-Semitic for them fighting the Israelis?
Well, that is an interesting thing, that the term anti-Semitism is now stripped of its broader meaning, and it only talks about the Jews. And what are the Semites? The Semites are a language group. And there's a big difference between a language group and a race. They're not the same thing at all. And that was in early anthropology. They couldn't get that straight. Then they began to see, again, the mobility of the human experience and how people are going from A to B and how people are sleeping with each other from A and B and all that stuff. I mean, the mixing is just pretty impressive. But I wanted to take this whole thing about the Jews being a race to where it leads to. The next part of it is, not only are we a race, but we're intelligent. Oh, we're very intelligent, and that's horseshit. I mean, that Jews are any more intelligent or less intelligent. You're in a community where education is emphasized. Well, there are other communities. I mean, you look at these Asian kids, these Asian kids, the ones I had for students, not all of them, but an awful lot of them were very serious. Are they Jewish? My God, they're smart. All right, this is just, i.e., we're smarter than everybody else, and that's a racial thing. And then, of course, the apex of this kind of ethno-narcissism, which is a very nice way of saying racism, is we're the chosen people. We're the chosen people. And you find that notion, the chosen people, so many people, not just Jews that have it, by the way, and the problem with that has always been, for me, if you're chosen, what are those people who aren't chosen? And so, it leads to a kind of really exclusivist thinking and just a bunch of crap. As far it's racist as far as I'm concerned. But they cling to it. The Zionists cling to this. Oh, we're smarter than everybody else. Yeah. Well, we'll talk about the Jewish kids I flunked. About how smart they
I think everybody's intelligent.
Yeah, right.
Because if you grow up and you have good parents and you have people who teach you things and you have opportunities in life, it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to be intelligent. I mean, you talked about growing up in New York with the different groups of people. I grew up in Connecticut. We talked about this earlier, and I have a lot of family in New York. I spent a lot of time in New York as well. And we had the same neighborhoods. We had the Polish kids, in one neighborhood. We had the black kids, the Puerto Rican kids, the Italians, the Irish, and so forth. And we had the Jewish. They kind of had the Jewish neighborhoods. And we were always fighting, but it wasn't like there was like the Jewish kids were any different than when we were fighting with the black kids were fighting, and chasing us down the street, or we were fighting them, or the Polish kids were picking a fight with us. I don't think we ever really fought with the Italian kids. The Italian kids are always trying to stand around with their hair all prettied up and slicked back. Nothing against Italians. I love you. But it just wasn't really a thing. Like, there wasn't like we single them out like, oh, these are a group of people that are just terrible.
No, we never had any of that.
I don't see that anywhere in our society. Sure, you have some racist people here and there, and that's, they may have some racist white people who don't like Jews, they don't like blacks, they don't, whatever. But with this whole Israeli thing, it's like this weird little anomaly that's like, you can't say anything about them.
All right, we got to break through that.
Because then you're anti-Semitic.
All right, so that is worn so
or racist.
Thin. Look, before I came here, I was listening. So I think you're aware that yesterday the UN Security Council passed a resolution in which the United States finally abstained. So they didn't veto it for actually all it is a temporary ceasefire during Ramadan. Okay, temporary ceasefire during Ramadan. We're halfway through Ramadan. We only got 2 weeks more. So really, all it is a 2-week ceasefire. It's not Okay. Yet it did force Washington's hand. They did not want to go along with it, but world public opinion is moving in such a tidal wave of sympathy for what the Palestinians are going through and such horror at what the Israelis are doing that the United States really had to abstain. Okay, so the first thing I hear is the Israeli representative to the United Nations commenting on this Security Council resolution on ceasefire. And what is he saying? The UN Security Council is anti-Semitic. Okay, the United Nations is anti-Semitic. The world is... All right, this is run its course as far as I'm concerned. I think I was telling you I'm going to be going down to New Mexico to give a talk on Saturday. Raton, New Mexico. I'm really looking forward to it. I mean that. Raton is not all that far from a place called Ludlow, where this state has certain history in terms of how it treated its miners back in the day. But anyhow, the couple that invited me, he was very concerned, and he writes me, he says, I keep being attacked as anti-Semitic. And I said, well, what'd you say? And he said, I just talked about a ceasefire for Gaza.
That's awful.
So I told him, you're not anti-Semitic, and we'll talk about it. All right, this is worn thin. I don't see this. They have played that. It's the only card they have left. So they play that card, and now they've played the card so often that it's again like crying wolf, if you like. It's afterwards. Wait a second, this is silly.
It's not true.
Yes, of course it's not true.
People are talking about Israel. I'm not hearing people say Jews. Like if you were sitting here saying the Jews and this
Right.
and this and those Jewish people.
That's quite different.
That's way different.
Yes.
But they're talking about Israel.
All right, so how does all this nonsense work? Israel tries to claim to represent all the Jews. All right, it claims to represent all the Jews.
Who gave them that authority?
No, but who gave them that? They gave themselves the authority. That's
You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. So that's how that's the card they play, and that's also the reason why anti-Zionist Jews are a particular nuisance to them.
Right.
Because
it messes up the narrative.
Yeah, and messes. Yeah, well, that seems like what I've been doing in life is just messing up.
If you and me are
narratives.
friends.
Yeah, right.
And I say something about Israel, but I don't say something about my Jewish friends.
Yeah, it's quite different.
It messes up the
Right,
narrative.
right.
Or it makes it more difficult.
But the thing about it is, nobody likes to be accused of being anti-Semitic. So what it has done up until recently is it paralyzes people, because then you scratch your head and say, "Oh, gee, I criticize. Am I anti-Semitic or not? Oh, I don't want to be anti-Semitic." So that's the impact that it has had. People who deep down inside are not anti-Jewish in any way, probably don't even care one way or the other about whether people are Jewish or not. They're caught in this dilemma, and who wants to be accused of being a racist? And I was thinking about that a lot, because think about what it is. It's those people who are practicing racial discrimination against fellow Semites, interestingly enough, and they're accusing the victims and the supporters of the victims of racism. Mm-hmm. It's a clever strategy. It's basically taking the ideological offensive, all right, and putting your opponents on the defensive by accusing them of the racism that you are perpetuating in Israel against Palestinians. Works really well. Good deal.
One that drives me nuts. I'm just confused, and it just goes back to this whole insane narrative and all these lies that are being told and believed. Is when people say that support Palestinians, and listen carefully, please, people listening, I want you to listen carefully. When people say that the Palestinians want freedom. And when the Palestinians say that they want freedom in their land, which happens to be from the river to the sea, they're not saying get rid of the Israelis or kill the Israelis. They're saying they want freedom from the river to the sea. It's dubbed as anti-Semitic. Although, here's the flip side of this. It blows my mind. And this is what I was told. And I did some research on it, and I found that this was the facts, at least what I found on the internet, that the Israeli flag itself, the blue lines at the top and the bottom with Israel in the middle being the Star of David, is from the river to the sea, that's their land.
So are they anti-Semitic by doing that?
So how come they can say it?
Well, that's the whole thing.
They can make it their whole identity of this is ours from the river to the sea. But then when the people that were living there said, we just want to be free. We never said kill Jewish people or Israelis between the river and the sea. We just want to be free and live on our own land and without fear, with the same rights.
Right.
Just be free. Just be free. That's all they said. Just be free from the river to the sea. Then this narrative comes from that side that says, oh, they're saying that they want us all dead.
Yeah, they take things out of context and to a degree that's incredible. There's more to that story because the first place that term from the river to the sea is found is in the founding documents of the Likud Party of Israel. They use that expression, from the river to the sea.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that's where I first found it.
Right.
Yeah.
So once again, it's all right for Israel to claim for Zionist Jews all the land from the river to the sea, but it's not okay for Palestinians to say we should be free. It's a very trivial thing that right now is quite emotional, but in the end, way down deep, it's shallow. It's nothing, really.
It's so just shallow, but it's being used as a
correct.
Big prop.
Yes, you're right. It's shallow, being used as a big prop, and it will work temporarily, and it's working now, at least to a certain extent. But it's not just unscientific, but it's really turning history upside down, and it's unsustainable as some kind of a theme, as far as I'm concerned, because it's nonsense.
So people, I think, and a lot of people on the Palestinian side, they're not going to like me saying this, and I know a lot of Palestinians, and I'm friends with some Palestinians, and it just seems to me like the Palestinians are losing, and it seems to me like they could potentially be pushed out from Gaza. I know with all their courage and all their strength, it just seems really bad. I mean, today, even in the countryside of Kufr Malik outside of Ramallah, which is like one of the last free places in the West Bank, Ramallah being, there was shooting today. And the IDF was in there shooting, and there was a bunch of fighting, and it's going bad. So if the Israelis, I want to make the argument, if they do displace the Palestinians and they do take this land as theirs, is the world going to, I guess my question is twofold. If that happens, is the world just going to okay, well,
accept it?
It got resolved and it's quiet now and we're just going to move on. But I don't think it will, because Israel doesn't seem to still be trying to get along with their neighbors. And then if the Palestinians are not pushed out, if the Israel has a harder time pushing them out and they're not able to do that, will they be free anywhere in that land that used to be theirs?
All right. First, of course, we don't know how this situation in Gaza is going to be played out. Will Israel be able to ethnically cleanse Gaza of Palestinians? And they're certainly making, quite a grand effort to do that. So what I relate to in your comment is the seriousness of the situation and how hard it is. And I don't know the answer to that. And none of us know what's going to happen. Here's what I would simply remind you of. There are some other wars. So again, because of my personal experience in North Africa, I became very familiar with the situation of the Algerians under French colonialism, which is very similar, not identical, but very similar to Zionism and the Palestinians, i.e., another form of settler colonialism. So terrible war of independence, took 8 years. The general statistic for the number of Algerians killed by the French for many years was 1 million. 1 million Algerians between 54 and 62 who were killed. Recently, there are Arab scholars who have suggested that maybe the number was double that. Now, whether it was 1 million or 2 million out of a population of 8 million people, think of the suffering. And, we're not talking about the torture and the wounds and the emotional stuff that comes from that. And the point here is the high price that the Algerian people had to pay for their freedom. It's a kind of price that we don't know. Let's get a little closer to home. We hear a lot about the 58,000 Americans who died in Vietnam, including a lot of folks that I knew, people my age. Not just the Americans who died there, but the ones who committed suicide afterwards. I have friends that committed suicide. They left Vietnam in 69 or 70. They committed suicide in 83 and 84, 15 years later. So unquestionably, tragic. We don't hear very much about the Vietnamese who died. What's the figure there? The minimum figure is 3 million. It's 3 or 4 million people. And we could use other examples. So what's the point here? The point here that the price for freedom is so cruel and so harsh. It's hard to believe that people, why go through that? And I am not sure why. It just seems to me life has become so intolerable that people feel they have no choice. They're willing to make that kind of sacrifice. And so here we are with the Palestinian people. There's a second thing to add here. No doubt, what's happening to the civilian population of Gaza is genocidal. And the big part of it is going to be from starvation. And just the whole blockade of any kind of food being let in. That having been said, militarily, Israel's pretty good at killing civilians. It's not so good at killing Hamas fighters, and it's even less good at killing Hezbollah fighters. So when you look at the military balance of power, it's different than looking at the humanitarian tragedy. And that's kind of a disconnect. So, and when I look at it, what determines whether Israel in this case is winning or losing this war? How it defines what victory is. So how is it that the Israelis have defined what winning is? They've made it very clear. First, they said, we have to eliminate Hamas completely. Then they took a backup position where we have to eliminate the leadership of Hamas, okay? And now they've actually backed up from that. So in terms of their original goals, I think it's quite clear that Israel has not accomplished its goals, all right? So militarily, it has not achieved what it wants. Politically, in terms of world public opinion opinion about Israel, the myth of the wonderful democracy, quote, the only democracy in the Middle East, which isn't never been true anyhow, but still, is shattered. And while it's hard to evaluate how world public opinion can influence, kind of a peaceful resolution of what's going on there. My sense is that Israel has entered into a permanent identity crisis from which it will not get out of that hole at all. And it will only deepen over time. And So the notion that the Palestinians have lost or Israel has won is, in terms of world public opinion, the wave of sympathy for the Palestinian people, once you get out of the United States or Britain or a few other places, is almost universal. Okay, that does not take away from the horror of what we're seeing every day, but it's not true that Israel is winning this war. Far from it.
Yeah, you're right. When you put it in perspective, what is winning, right? What
Yeah,
what
I mean, I know it does
qualifies
not
as
help
winning? Yeah.
watching some little kid die of starvation, which, look, I wake up thinking about Gaza. I go to bed thinking about Gaza. I spend most of my days, I've got to do something to pressure my government, this government, to have a more responsible policy to ending this genocide. So that's it. And then it's a funny thing. I was, a couple of years ago, it was the 50th anniversary of the Israeli occupation, 1967, territories. And I wrote a note to my friend, one of my friends, an Irish guy out of Berkeley. And I was just bemoaning my fate. Oh, I've been working on this, trying to end this injustice for so long. It ain't going to go away. Not only that, it's gotten worse. There's more settlements now, more Palestinians being expelled. This is long before October 7th. And will we ever see a day where there's peace with justice? He writes me back, 2 words. You'll like this. I'm Irish. Well, what do you mean by that? It took the Irish 800 years. Why are you being so impatient, Rob? I just laughed when I saw that. So I do believe that that Israel, as the kind of state that it is unsustainable. It cannot continue along this course. I don't know how much longer it can continue on the course it's been on. I don't see it changing course. The change that I see as being something that would long-term integrate Israel into the region. I've already explained it to you earlier on. Israel has to make peace with the Palestinians, and that's the key to its making peace with its neighbors. But at this point, that seems to be so far away that it's highly, highly unlikely. And how do you break down these racist apartheid structures and this mentality, this genocidal mentality that affects so many? I don't know the answer to that. I just know that it can't go on forever. It can't. I also know that the Arabs, particularly, not just Hezbollah, but you've got the Iraqis, you've got the Yemenis, you've got Palestinians throughout the region. They're learning how to fight back. They don't have, of course, the material means of doing it. So what that requires in this kind of warfare is patience. And that's very hard to be patient watching the slaughter that's taking place. But they do what they can with what they got. And, what else can people do? So.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
All right.
I thank you, Rob. I really appreciate your perspective, and I think it was well said.
Well, I don't know. I had a good time last time. Came back for more.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with talking, man. I wish more people would talk and fight less.
Yeah,
sure.
Well, I do too. All right. Well, thank you once again. I really appreciate being able to share my thoughts with you.
Absolutely. Anytime, Rob. You're always welcome.
Well, thank you. Take care.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye.